Hi guys, and welcome back to EverlastCyber. In today's video, we'll be going through some multiple choice questions on the human skeleton. So we'll start right off with question 1. What is the primary function of the rib cage? A. To produce red blood cells. B. To support the shoulder. C. To aid in digestion. D. To protect the lungs and heart. In option A, the production of the red blood cells is done by the bone marrow, and this is usually in the long bones in the body. In option B, the clavicle and scapula primarily supports the shoulder. So that is not the function of the rib cage. In option C, um, the stomach and intestines are responsible for digestion. So that's the role of organs like the stomach and intestines. In option D, the primary function of the rib cage is to support the lungs and heart. So the rib cage is a bony structure made up of ribs, the sternum, and the thoracic vertebrae. So its primary function is to protect the vital organs, especially the lungs and the heart. So our answer here is option D. The function of the rib cage is to protect the lungs and heart. Question 2. The skull is primarily responsible for protecting which organ? A. Heart. B. Brain. C. Lungs. D. Liver. The heart is protected by the rib cage and the sternum. The brain is encased in the skull. That's the cranium. This is a hard protective case around the brain, and this safeguards it from injury. The lungs are protected by the rib cage, and the liver is protected partly by the lower ribs. However, the organ that the skull protects is the brain, and that is option B. Question 3. Which ribs are considered true ribs? A. First to seventh ribs. B. Fifth to 10th ribs. C. 8th to 10th. D. 9th to 12th. The first to seventh ribs are considered the true ribs because they are directly attached to the sternum, which is the breastbone, and they have their own costal cartilages. The 8th to 10th ribs, these are called false ribs, and they attach to the sternum indirectly through the cartilage of the rib above. The 11th to 12th is known as floating ribs. So I've attached a diagram of the pairs of ribs that the human skeleton has. There are practically 24 ribs and there are 12 pairs. And then there are three types of ribs. So we have the true ribs, we have the false ribs, and then we have the floating ribs. The true ribs are the first to seventh. The false ribs are the 8th to 12th, and the floating ribs are the 11th and 12th rib. So our answer here is option A. The first to seventh ribs are considered the true ribs because they are directly attached to the sternum through their own costal cartilages. Question 4. Which part of the skeleton includes the skull, spine, and rib cage? A. Appendicular skeleton. B. Axial skeleton. C. Peripheral skeleton. D. Central skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is made up of the limbs, that's the arms and the legs, and also the girdles, which are the shoulder and the pelvis. These are attached to the axial rib. So remember, appendicular skeleton is made up of the limbs, while the axial skeleton forms the central axis of the body. The axial skeleton consists of the skull, which protects the brain. It consists of the spine, which supports the body and protects the spinal cord. And then it also contains the rib cage and sternum, which protects the heart and the lungs. So our answer here is option B, the axial skeleton. These are made up of the skull, the spine, and the rib cage. Question 5. What type of tissue connects the ribs to the sternum? A. Tendon. B. Muscle. C. Cartilage. D. Ligaments. Tendons attach muscles to bones. The muscles in option B helps with movement, but they don't directly connect the ribs to the sternum. The ribs are connected to the sternum by costal cartilage, and this provides the flexibility that the skeleton has, and it allows the rib cage to expand and contract during breathing. Ligaments attaches bones to bones. For example, in joints like the knee joint, the elbow joints, ligaments are there to connect bone to bone. However, the type of tissue that connects the rib to the sternum is known as the cartilage, and that is option C. Question 6. Which of the following bones is not part of the arm? A. Humerus. B. Radius. C. Ulna. D. Femur. The humerus is the upper arm bone. The radius and the ulna are the two bones of the forearm. The femur, on the other hand, is the thigh bone, and this is located in the leg and not the arm. So our answer here is option D. The femur is not part of the arm. The femur is a thigh bone, and it is located in the leg. Question 7. Which ribs are referred to as false ribs? Remember, we've gone through a question that asked about the true ribs, but this is a question about the false ribs. Option A, 1st to 5th. Option B, 6th to 8th. Option C, 8th to 10th. Option D, 11th to 12th. Remember, the true ribs are the 1st to 7th ribs, and they are called true ribs because they attach directly to the sternum through their own costal cartilage. The false ribs are attached indirectly to the sternum through the cartilage of the rib above, and this is the 8th to the 10th ribs. Floating ribs are the 11th and 12th ribs, and they do not attach to the sternum at all. So our answer here is option C. The 8th to 10th ribs are known as false ribs. Question 8. Why are rib bones relatively easy to break compared to other bones? A. They are too short. B. They are thin and curved. C. They have no blood supply. D. They are made of cartilage only. Rib bones are not short, and the length of the rib doesn't also determine the fragility. Some ribs are long, some ribs are short. However, both of them, both the long and short ribs, can still break under trauma. So length is not the main reason that ribs fracture easily. Ribs are thin curved bones that are designed to be flexible enough to expand and contract during breathing. This flexibility, while it is helpful for movement, it makes them more susceptible to fractures from either impact or direct trauma. However, they are still strong enough to protect the heart and lungs, but their shape makes them easier to break than thicker bones in the body like the femur. In option C, This is incorrect because ribs do have a blood supply from the intercostal arteries, veins, and capillaries. Lack of blood supply would make healing difficult, but that is not the reason why they break easily. In option D, that is also wrong because ribs are bones and not cartilage. Although the front ends of the first 10 ribs are connected to the sternum by the costal cartilage, ribs are bones themselves, they are not cartilage. So our answer here is option B. Their thin curved shape allows for flexibility during breathing, but it also makes them more vulnerable to fractures. Question 9. Which bone is commonly known as the collarbone? A. Scapula, B. Clavicle, C. Sternum, D. Humerus. The scapula is the shoulder blade and not the collarbone. The clavicle, commonly called the collarbone, connects the sternum, which is the breastbone, to the scapula, which is the shoulder blade. The sternum is the breastbone in the center of the chest, while the humerus is the upper arm bone. So our answer here is option B. The clavicle connects the sternum to the scapula. Question 10. What is the smallest bone in the human body? A. Stapes, B. Malleus, C. Incus, D. Hyoid. The stapes is one of the three tiny bones in the middle ear or the ossicles. It is the smallest bone in the human body and it measures about 3 millimeters in length. The malleus is another middle ear bone, however, it is slightly larger than the stapes. The incus is also the middle ear bone, but it is also larger than the stapes. The hyoid is a U-shaped bone in the neck that supports the tongue. However, it is still larger than the stapes. So out of these options, the correct answer is option A. The stapes is the smallest bone in the human body and it is one of the three tiny bones that is located in the middle ear. Question 10. At what phase of respiration does the rib cage expand? A. Exhalation, B. Inhalation, C. Coughing, D. Both inhalation and exhalation. During inhalation, the intercostal muscles contract and the rib cage expands outward and upward. This increases the thoracic cavity volume, thereby allowing the lungs to fill with air. The question asked, at what phase of respiration does the rib cage expand? Looking at exhalation, the rib cage contracts as the muscles relax, thereby pushing air out. So in this case, during exhalation, the rib cage contracts, but during inhalation, the rib cage expands. So our answer here is option A. Coughing involves a forceful exhalation, and by exhaling, the rib cage contracts. So that is incorrect. And option D is also incorrect because it can be inhalation and exhalation. It is only during inhalation that the rib cage expands. Question 12. What is the most common name for the thoracic cage? A. Rib cage, B. Skull, C. Pelvis, D. Vertebral column. The thoracic cage is the bony structure in the chest that is formed by the ribs, the sternum, and the thoracic vertebrae. Its main function is to protect the heart and lungs and also to support breathing. The skull protects the brain. The pelvis protects the lower abdominal organs and provides support for the legs, while the vertebral column supports the body and protects the spinal cord. So our correct answer here is option A. The thoracic cage is also known as the rib cage, and its main function is to protect the heart and lungs, as well as supporting breathing. Question 13. What is the smallest and narrowest part of the sternum? A. Body of the sternum. B. Angle of Lewis. C. Xiphoid process. D. Manubrium. The body of the sternum is the long central part of the sternum. The angle of Lewis is the junction between the manubrium and the body of the sternum, and it is important for counting the ribs. The xiphoid process is the smallest and narrowest, and also the lowest part of the sternum. It is cartilaginous and it may ossify, that is turn to bone in adults. So as an adult ages, it may turn to bone. It serves as an attachment point for muscles like the diaphragm, the transversus thoracis, and the rectus abdominis. So out of the options we have, the smallest and lowest part of the sternum is the xiphoid process, and that is option C. Question 14. Which part of the rib connects directly to the vertebrae? A. Costal cartilage. B. Head of the rib. C. Shaft of the rib. D. Xiphoid process. The costal cartilage connects the anterior end of the rib to the sternum, but the head of the rib is the posterior end and it articulates with the thoracic vertebrae at the costovertebral joints. The shaft of the rib is the long, curved middle portion of the rib. However, it doesn't connect directly to the bones. While the xiphoid process is a part of the sternum, it's the smallest and narrowest part of the sternum. However, it is unrelated to the rib vertebrae connection we have in the question. So our answer here is option B, the head of the rib. Question 15. Which ribs are known as the floating ribs? A, first and second. B, ninth and 10th. C, 11th and 12th. D, 5th and 6th. Our answer here is option C. The 11th and 12th ribs are known as the floating ribs because they don't have any attachment to the sternum at all. They only attach at the back to the vertebrae. Question 16. What bone is the rib cage attached to at the front of the body? A. Sternum. B. Clavicle. C. Humerus. D. Scapula. The rib cage is attached to the front of the body, to the sternum via the costal vertebrae, and it is this connection that allows the rib cage to expand and contract during breathing. The clavicle is a collarbone and it connects the arm to the sternum, but it doesn't connect to the ribs directly. The humerus is the upper arm bone and it is not part of the rib cage, while the scapula or the shoulder blade is located at the back and it is not directly connected to the rib cage anteriorly. The question is asking what bone is the rib cage attached to at the front of the body. The front is the anterior. So out of these options, the answer here is option A, the sternum. Question 17. How many pairs of ribs are there in the human rib cage? A, 10, B, 12, C, 14, D, 16. The answer here is option B. So there are 24 ribs, making them 12 pairs. So the human rib cage has 12 pairs of ribs. These 12 pairs of ribs are divided into the true ribs, the false ribs, and the floating ribs. The true ribs are the first to seventh pairs. The false ribs are the 8th to 10th pairs, while the floating ribs are the 11th and 12th pairs. Question 18. What is the rib cage's primary role during breathing? A. Expand and contract the lungs. B. Protect the diaphragm. C. Control heart rates. D. Monitor pulse. The rib cage plays an important role in breathing by expanding during inhalation in order to allow the lungs to fill with air, and then contracting during exhalation to help push air out of the lungs. In option B, the diaphragm is protected by the rib cage indirectly, but that is not the primary role of the rib cage during breathing. In option C, the heart rate is regulated by the autonomic nervous system and not the rib cage, while in option D, the pulse is detected at arteries. However, this is unrelated to the rib cage. So our answer here is option A. The primary role of the rib cage during breathing is to expand and to contract the lungs. Question 19. How many vertebrae are there in the human vertebral column? A. 24, B. 26, C. 33, D. 36. For this, we'll be going with option C. The human vertebral column is made up of 33 vertebrae in total. So out of this 33, we have 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 5 sacral vertebrae that are fused in adults, and 4 coccygeal vertebrae that are also fused in adults. So our answer is option C, 33. Question 20. What is the name of the joint that connects the ribs to the vertebrae? A. Costovertebral joints. B. Radioscarpal joints. C. Sternoclavicular joints. D. Glenohumeral joints. The costovertebral joint is the connection between the head of a rib and the thoracic vertebrae, and this connection allows for slight movement of the ribs during breathing, helping the rib cage to expand and contract. The radiocarpal joint is located in the wrist, that is the wrist joint, between the radius and the carpal bones. The sternoclavicular joint is the joint between the sternum and the clavicle or the collarbone, while the glenohumeral joint is the shoulder joint between the humerus and the scapula. So our answer here is option A. The costovertebral joint is the connection between the head of a rib and the thoracic vertebrae. Question 21. How many pairs of floating ribs are in the human body? A. 6 pairs. B. 2 pairs. C. 3 pairs. D. 4 pairs. Our answer here is option B. Remember, the floating ribs are the 11th and the 12th pair of ribs. They are called the floating ribs because they don't attach to the sternum or to the cartilage of the other ribs at the front. They are only attached to the vertebrae at the back. That's why they are called the floating ribs. Question 22. Which part of the skeleton forms the hip joint along with the femur? A. Pelvis. B. Tibia. C. Fibula. D. Patella. The pelvis forms at the acetabulum, and this is the socket where the head of the femur fits to create the hip joints. This pelvic joint allows for a wide range of leg movements while supporting body weight. The tibia is the shin bone. It is part of the knee and the ankle joints. The fibula is the smaller bone of the lower leg, and it stabilizes the ankle. However, this is not part of the hip joint. The patella is the kneecap, and it protects the knee joint. So out of this option, the part of the skeleton that forms the hip joint along with the femur is known as the pelvis, and that is option A. Question 23. What is the name of the uppermost part of the sternum? A. Body, B. Clavicle, C. Manubrium, D. Xiphoid process. The body is the long central portion of the sternum. The clavicle is a collarbone, but it's not part of the sternum itself. The manubrium is the uppermost part of the sternum, and it articulates with the clavicles, that's the collarbones, and the first pair of ribs. So it forms the top portion of the sternum, which is above the body of the sternum. The xiphoid process is a small, narrow tip of the sternum. It's at the bottom part of the sternum. So our answer here is option C, the manubrium. That is the uppermost part of the sternum. Question 24. What is the primary composition of ribs? We've had a similar question before. The answer here is option B. So the ribs are primarily made of bone, which gives them strength and structure in order to protect the vital organs like the heart and the lungs. Question 25. What separates the ribs from the lungs? A. Mediastinum, B. Pleura, C. Pericardium, D. Diaphragm. The mediastinum is the central space between the lungs containing the heart, trachea, and esophagus. The pleura, on the other hand, is a double-layered membrane that surrounds the lungs. So the double layer is made up of the visceral pleura, which covers the lungs directly, and the parietal pleura, which lines the inside of the chest wall and the rib cage. Between these two layers, we have the pleural fluid, and it reduces the friction as the lungs expand and contract during breathing. The pericardium is a sac that surrounds and protects the heart. This has nothing to do with the lungs, while the diaphragm is a muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity and aids in breathing. So the membrane that separates the ribs from the lungs is known as the pleura, and that is option B. This brings us to the end of the multiple choice questions for the human skeleton. Don't forget to like, comment, and share, and also hit the subscribe button so that you'll be informed when our next informative video will be dropping. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.